All right, guys, we're about halfway through period 7 of the APUSH curriculum, and today in topic 7.7, we're going to begin our two-topic look at the 1920s. So we're going to break this up between topic 7.7 and 7.8, and today we're going to focus on things like changes in communication and technology. So let's get into the roaring 20s and look at some causes and effects of these innovations in communication and technology. Now, we're going to begin our discussion today by looking at consumerism. So consumerism is something that really kind of got started during the Gilded Age, and consumerism is just basically kind of the mass production and mass consumption culture that is associated with modern capitalist societies. And let's think about why America's economy was booming in the 1920s. And the reason, of course, is lots and lots of new technologies coming on board. We've also got an influx of immigrants, so we've got affordable labor. America is becoming more urban, and that way it allows more efficiency as far as production goes. Our farmers are more productive than ever because of mechanization. So our economy, it has a lot of positive aspects to it. And this brings us to the advertising industry. So, manufacturers were so good at producing stuff, there was always a kind of a danger that they would be able to outproduce their consumption. So with the advertising industry, you solve that problem, because what you do is through advertisements, you convince Americans that they need to buy more, and more. You're always trotting out the next and latest, greatest product, and showing how wonderful these things are and how your life is not complete until you have this product. I mean, we still do the same thing today with, think of things like cell phones or cars or whatever else. That item becomes almost more important than anything else, and you've got to go get that object. Take a look at some 1920s advertisings. The one on the left is a very odd advertisement for the Gillette safety razor. On the right, we've got the Hoover vacuum. On the left, we're advertising Lucky Strike cigarettes. And clearly, you can definitely tell that those two advertisements in particular on this page are targeting women and trying to use kind of concern about their looks against them, so they'll buy your products. How about this one for an advertising? I would never buy that for my kids. Okay, so let's assume that you want to buy all these new things, but you don't have enough money to buy them up front. Well, gosh, what can you possibly do? And the answer is you need to buy on credit. And this brings us to one of the more famous things about the 1920s. It's called the installment plan. And this is the idea that instead of having to save up the entire cost of that car or radio or stove or whatever, rather than having to save up that whole cost, what you do is you put like a down payment on that thing, and then you pay in installments. That might be weekly, monthly, whatever they decide on, but you buy now and pay later. And of course, that certainly encourages people to buy more than they probably should sometimes. All right, now let's take a look at the automobile industry. And we're going to look at a man you probably never heard of. You thought we were probably going to go straight to Henry Ford, and we will get to him. But first, a man that you may not be knowledgeable of. His name is Frederick W. Taylor. And he's known as the father of scientific management. And what scientific management is basically looking at business operations almost as if a scientist were looking at some sort of problem to be solved. You're going to experiment, you're going to analyze, you're going to collect data, you're going to study the data, look for trends and so forth. And he is associated with this thing we think of the 1920s as the efficiency movement. So the efficiency movement is all about like studying the manufacturing process or whatever process you're looking at, and you're looking at each individual step, and you're trying to find the inefficiencies. If you can shave 3 seconds on this one step in the manufacturing process and you manufacture 1 million things, well, you've shaved 3 million seconds off, right? And so you're getting more bang for the buck. Now, the downside of the efficiency movement is you begin to look at your employees as basically kind of like machines and not really as people. And, things like having to go to the restroom on a break or having to take a break just to, ease your mind or whatever. These things create inefficiencies in the manufacturing process. All right, now on to Henry Ford. Now, as you all know, Henry Ford did not invent the car. The car was first developed in Germany in the very late 1800s. But what Henry Ford does with his famous Model T is make really the first mass-produced, affordable, reliable, and just accessible automobile. Henry Ford was really obsessed with this idea of creating a car for the masses, and that's what the Model T is. And kind of piggybacking on what we just talked about with Taylorism, with the efficiency movement, Fordism is basically the same thing. It's this dedication to standardization and efficiency. The Model T was produced over many years, and it didn't see a whole lot of changes between years because any changes would require retooling the factory, and that, of course, would cut into efficiency. So the Model T kind of stayed relatively the same over its production line. Ultimately, some 15 million Model Ts are going to be produced, and these things were rolling off the assembly line just one after the other. You could take the thousands of parts that make up a Model T, and 2 hours later it would be assembled into a running model. That's how efficient they were. Now, there is one thing we can say about Henry Ford, though, that's not so pleasant. And one of the downsides of Henry Ford that you may have heard of before is his anti-Semitism. He did not care much for Jews. Henry Ford even owned a newspaper called the Dearborn Independent, and you can see the headline on one of these issues. It says, "The International Jew, the World's Problem." And Ford really bought into this conspiracy theory about Jews, which sadly is still kind of alive on the fringes, that asserts that Jews are part of some sort of international conspiracy that's controlling the world's economy, and the government's kind of behind the scenes. Now, the rise of the automobile produces a lot more than just manufacturing jobs. Cars have so many other impacts on the economy. So people are transporting the cars, people are fueling the car, right? The guy here, the guy filling up the car at the gas station. You've got people making different pieces for the car, people repairing them. I mean, it's going to create literally millions of jobs in America through the rise of the automobile. Now, with the rise of the automobile, we are going to start building new roads because, cars are not going to do very well in the quagmire that is unpaved roads. And so all of a sudden we're going to make more efficient means of transportation through better highway systems and roads and so forth. And these were often paid through gasoline taxes. In case you were wondering, gasoline taxes are still very much a part of the American economy. You can see which states have the highest gasoline taxes per gallon. You can see Pennsylvania, for example, 50 cents or plus per gallon. And this is on top of the federal taxes already in place. So again, this is how we fund our highways and roads today. Now, the car is more than just an economic changer. It's also a social changer in the sense that the cars present a lot more freedom to travel, to see the world. Well, at least in America, anyways. You're going to give women more independence than ever before, and this also allows those migration patterns we've been looking at. Things like the Great Migration, for example, of African Americans out of the South. The car helps, move that along. All right, let's now take a look at the age of flight. As we all know, 1903, the Wright brothers from Dayton, Ohio, flew for the first time. And then, about a decade later, World War I started. And World War I is where airplanes really went from primitive and fragile to reliable, fast, long-distance means of transportation. And in the 1920s, in fact, we start to see the beginnings of airline passenger travel. We start to see airmail being transported, so now a letter can travel long distances in a short amount of time. And in fact, one of these airmail pilots went on in 1927 to become the most famous man in the entire world. In 1927, his name is Charles Lindbergh. And what he did is in 1927, he flew nonstop from New York to Paris, a distance of many, many, many miles across the Atlantic. It took him 39 and a half hours to conduct this flight. That's a nonstop solo flight. He has no radio on board. There's only one engine, so if it goes out, you're done. I mean, this is very, very risky, which is why people had tried these kind of things before and never succeeded, and Lindbergh was the first to do this. He comes home as a national hero, international hero, right? People are just obsessed with Lucky Lindy. And Lindy's adventures in the sky really help to popularize flying, and it makes it, it's just further evidence that flying is perhaps going to be the new great way of traveling the world. All right, let's take a look at the radio now and see its impact on America. In the earliest days of radio, it was known as wireless telegraph because you would send telegraph messages, Morse code in other words, wirelessly. It didn't carry sound in the sense of people's voices. But then radio, continues to evolve, and the 1920s is really kind of the birth of radio culture. The first radio stations start to open up. Radios help standardize our popular culture. People would gather around the radios, as you can see in the pictures here, kind of like some people gather around the TV. It was a means of sort of family shared experience. Also, this has the means of affecting the political landscape, because now politicians can be basically beamed right into your home, and you can hear them while you sit in your recliner and listen to these politicians, tell you why you should vote for them or what changes are coming or that kind of thing. You can also get the news. You can listen to sports. I mean, it's got 1,000,001 uses. By the way, I thought I'd share this with you since we're all here in Tennessee. The Grand Ole Opry is the longest continuously broadcasting radio program in the world. It's been going on since 1925. Now, the way radio stations make their money is the same way that TV stations make their money today. It is through selling advertising space, in the sense that advertisers would maybe sponsor a particular program, or they'd come on and urge you to buy a particular product or something like that. And so as people would be listening, they would also be kind of buying into the whole consumerism of the 1920s. All right, now let's get into the movie industry a little bit and see how that is changing. And I know you might notice, like, wait a minute, that says 1915. That's not the 1920s. That's true, but this movie is going to have some big impacts on the 1920s, and it's called Birth of a Nation. This was directed by D.W. Griffith, one of the more famous names in movie lore and legend. And this movie was different than a lot of earlier movies. A lot of earlier movies tend to be very brief, 15, 20 minutes, some of them much shorter than even that. And they didn't have, a great deal of plot. It was more just the novelty of seeing the moving picture and people doing stuff, They were not movies like we kind of think of movies today. And The Birth of a Nation was really the first epic, long movie with elaborate costuming, elaborate sets, indoor and outdoor portions of the film. It really changed the way films were made and received. But there are also some really big downsides of Birth of a Nation. For example, this movie was super controversial back then and definitely still today. And the reason is Birth of a Nation is kind of just propaganda in favor of the Ku Klux Klan. It glorifies the KKK. It mocks and just humiliates African Americans. It's set basically in the Reconstruction era, and it just is a unpleasant movie in terms of content, in terms of the way that people are depicted. And sadly, this movie was actually shown at the White House by Woodrow Wilson. He was a big fan of this movie. Woodrow Wilson is a man who has a very controversial history when it comes to race, as we will talk more about later. All right, let's think about America as a movie-producing country. We all know, of course, that Hollywood is the capital of the world when it comes to making movies. And that's been the case for many, many years. And the attractive thing about Hollywood as a place to make movies is the fact that the climate is good throughout the year, so you can make movies not having to worry about snowstorms or even frankly a lot of rain showers. It's a pretty dry place, Southern California is, and so it's a great place to make movies. And America loved movies. By 1929, some 80 million movie tickets were being sold every week, which is astounding because our population in 1929 was, I don't have an exact number in front of me, but it's certainly probably, I don't know, maybe 110, 120 million people. Basically, almost more than half of all Americans were going to the movies every single week, which is astounding if you stop and do the math. All right, our next topic when it comes to movies is a movie that changed the way movies are consumed, and that is The Jazz Singer, starring Al Jolson. If you've never heard of Al Jolson, he was a pretty famous jazz singer from his era. I mean, literally, that was his job and the title of the movie. And this is the first so-called talkie, in the sense that spoken dialogue was accompanying the movie. So instead of being a silent film with some guy like playing the piano in the background or something, and they'd put up subtitles, this one is the kind of movie you would expect to see, right? You would go there, you listen to the actors and hear their voices and so forth, and it's all in sync. And this, broke a lot of ground. Now, unfortunately, because it is from the 1920s, it's not very racially sensitive. You can see on the left that is Al Jolson doing something called blackface, which is definitely not something that is appropriate. Definitely not in the modern era. We definitely wouldn't think that's very funny, but it was, that shows you how humor has changed in the last century. Now, another series of effects we can look at for the movie industry, this really is the birth of the modern celebrity. There really weren't that many celebrities prior to the 1920s. Politicians were well known, and there might be some writer that people know about or something, but there really weren't people that were famous, that were household names, and you'd see their picture everywhere. It just really wasn't that way. And the movie gives birth to those, to that celebrity. And you can see a couple of examples at the bottom of celebrities from the 1920s. The movies really kind of help create a mainstream of American popular culture because we're all watching the same movies. We're hearing the same things, seeing the same things. But there was also a lot of criticism of the movies in the 1920s. They were too violent or too full of sex or too full of commercialism or whatever. People thought these movies were just kind of rotting the brains of people who watched them in the sense that they were just kind of almost like empty calories. They're not really doing anything for you. It's just bland entertainment. All right, so that is it, guys, for our first of two topics on the 1920s. So in topic 7.7, we covered all kinds of things like the consumer society, the invention of the railroad, radio, not railroad, cars, airplanes. We covered a whole lot of ground. And in our next video, we will simply cover the second half of the 1920s.